In today's video, we'll be looking at two black and white films, Ilford's Delta 400 and HP5 Plus. So let's have a wander around and mix a few images, and then later on we'll develop and scan them and compare the results, just to see how different they really are. When I first started doing film photography, black and white film was actually my first choice, as that's what I was introduced to when I was studying it at college and felt most comfortable with. Though over the past couple of years, I've been actually doing more colour photography. Though with the recent announcement from Kodak and their price increase, I'm a little bit concerned on how that might affect me financially. So I thought actually now might be a good time to maybe go back and do more black and white photography, and a good opportunity to actually, at this point now, to compare some of the film stocks instead of automatically going towards HP5 Plus, which is what I've done in the past. As HP5 is a 400 ISO and Delta is also available at sensitivity, I thought I'd initially compare those two together.
Even though you wouldn't do the same, I'd give you the world like I promised.
As I'm using roll film, usually you'd have to use the whole roll before then replacing it to then use the other one. But obviously that's not ideal for when we're comparing the two film stocks together. But as you can see, I have access to a Hasselblad, and as you probably already know, Hasselblads have film backs. And the good thing about that is that you can have one film stock in one and then the other one in another. So then without moving the camera or changing any of the settings, I can then just easily take one off, put the other one on, and then just take the shot exactly as it is before. So that's pretty much the ideal situation when doing the comparisons. So I've just metered kind of like I usually do, kind of check the shadows and the highlights, and the actual grass isn't that far off exposure-wise from the kind of the darker, the brick, which is kind of about kind of, say, neutral grey. So what I might do is kind of take a few shots of this because the sky is just going to be so blown out. So I want to actually kind of bracket a couple of shots and again just see which one I prefer, and then compare the same again whether it's overexposed or not. So let's take a shot on each of the film stocks. So I've just kind of come across a nice simple scene, nothing too crazy, not kind of making artistic kind of photos, it's just to test again the film stocks, but just something I thought was kind of interesting. So I'm just going to set the camera up and take an image of it. Before we go ahead and look at any of the images, there are a couple of things I need to mention. So I developed the film using Ilford's DDX, which is a liquid concentrate developer, which is what I've always used in the past. To scan the film, I used an Epson V850 flatbed scanner, with Silverfast 8 as my software of choice. Even though Silverfast has film profiles for each individual film type, for this though I decided to use one they call standard, just to keep some consistency across both of the film types. So what are the differences between HP5 Plus and Delta, other than Delta being advertised as their professional line? Well, it's to do with the grain and how light is rendered onto it. HP5 features a traditional cubic grain structure known for its high latitude and wide tonal range, and because of this, grain can appear more coarse. Delta, on the other hand, uses something which Ilford call core shell technology, which creates extremely fine grain for its film speed, but also captures finer details. Though the downside of this is that it lacks that wider tonal range and can make images appear more contrasty. Now that that's over and done with, let's have a look at the images. So the first image that we're going to have a look at is where I was walking down one of the woodland pathways with a lot of the autumnal leaves on the ground. So if we zoom in to both of them to compare, so the one on the left is HP5 and the one on the right is the Delta. So again, the settings for both of these were exactly the same, and the position of the camera again wasn't moved, just the film back was again taken off and replaced with the camera not being changed at all whatsoever. So off the bat, to me, the HP5 seems to be kind of flatter, I would say, not pronounced kind of highlights compared to the Delta for sure. Definitely seems to be brighter on the kind of the foliage. The tree again is slightly less exposed compared to the Delta. Kind of initially, kind of like comparing the two together. But if we maybe zoom in, we can kind of hopefully see the details that are kind of created that way. In terms of the sharpness, I haven't done any digital sharpness, so these are literally just scanned from Silverfast and then hasn't had any kind of post-processing done afterwards, so we're literally just comparing the images as they are straight from the scanner. But with regards to the sharpness, I can't really see that much difference, but maybe that could be due to the limits of the flatbed scanner and then what the software can do. I guess a good place to look at the grain would be kind of the skies. They generally become more pronounced, the grain in those kind of highlighted areas where there's not too much detail kind of going on, to distract from the actual grain itself. And when comparing them, I guess the HP5 in this kind of area up here, the HP5, you could say the grain is more pronounced, but I wouldn't say it's like noticeable. It's not unpleasant or anything like that, and I actually generally quite like the presence of grain anyway. So maybe later on I can sharpen up one of these images using the Lightroom sharpener tool just to see if that kind of brings it out. Then we could maybe do another comparison with grain that way later on. But let's just continue looking at the shadows maybe down in the plants. So I think in the Delta, the shadows seem to be again brighter, but in terms of the detail within there, I would say you could still see the detail that HP5 has kind of captured. So let's have a look at the next image. So as you can see, there's not too many clouds kind of happening within the scene at the moment, just some very thin wispy clouds. And I guess we can have a look at the highlights in there. It's both captured the plain trail pretty well, so the highlight detail is pretty good for both of them. And the grain, I guess, in the Delta definitely seems to be kind of smoother compared to the HP5. But then maybe because of the grain, you kind of notice the kind of the transitions a bit better in the highlights with the cloud and then versus the sky. So I guess the dark details down within the grass and the pyramid kind of mausoleum, the tones are pretty similar, I would say. You could argue and say that the Delta is slightly darker, but that's just clutching at straws, I would say. But the detail on the mossy brick, because of the contrast, like in the previous image where the Delta seemed to highlight the foliage better, I think the detail probably on the brick of the mausoleum for the Delta is probably more contrasty, so you kind of get the sharpness, maybe artificial sharpness that way, kind of makes it stand out a bit better. But I'm still okay in terms of, like, there's no difference for my personal preference. I think they're both okay. And the shadow detail under the archways, again, hardly any kind of difference really. The grass just stands out a bit better in terms of, I guess, contrast, similar to the previous image where the foliage just kind of stands out a bit more, the highlights on the Delta. But I think you wouldn't be able to tell too much of a difference really once you've probably edited it further afterwards. And the last image is, I didn't film this, but it was on the way back to the car, wandering kind of through the wooded area. Soft, subdued lighting. I think the clouds had actually kind of rolled over, so there wasn't really too much kind of sun kind of coming through at that point. So I thought this could just be an interesting image to maybe compare just for different lighting wise. So this is a kind of a lower contrast scene, and I guess out of these two images, the Delta definitely looks noticeably different. I guess it kind of looks more, you could say, overexposed, I suppose. With the brighter trees in the background versus HP5's kind of subdued greys, they're slightly duller. And the shadows, I guess, in here on the Delta do appear brighter versus the HP5. So maybe the Delta is kind of handling the shadows just a bit differently within that kind of more diffuse lighting instead of it being so harsh. But I think I don't mind the HP5 shadows. I guess I do like the Delta in that it has made the tree bark kind of pop out, I suppose, a bit more. It has that added contrast which kind of helps create the texture within the bark. Let's have a look down in here. A similar thing where you've got the leaves kind of brighter than they are on the HP5. And the grain's not too bad. It's very, very similar, I'd say, the grain wise. There's probably no difference, I would say, in here. In terms of sharpness, again, I think you couldn't really tell the difference, not between both of them. I guess you could argue that this one is slightly sharper. I reckon once you've done the editing on Lightroom or any other kind of photo editing software, you probably wouldn't be able to tell really that much of a difference. Though I would be curious to know what these images would look like on, say, for example, like a drum scan. Maybe then you would actually kind of see the difference between the two grain structures more evidently. But yeah, I think the overall difference between those two is very minimal. You probably do have a higher contrast on Delta, but that was to be expected anyway, even before kind of going ahead into it. I mean, kind of ignoring the sky really in these images, just because there wasn't really any information there anyway. It was just a blue sky, empty with a few kind of wispy clouds. So I'm kind of ignoring that because there's nothing of interest that I'm worried about, wanting to kind of preserve that information, because it wasn't of importance to me. It was more to do, well, with these scenes in particular, it was more to do, I guess, with the kind of the darker areas where you wanted to have that information. So now that we've looked at the images, I guess the next question is, am I going to be picking Delta or HP5 Plus going forwards? But to be honest, I think I could just see myself using both of them really. Seeing how similar both film stocks are, I could happily use both of them side by side along with one another, though I am curious to know how well Delta handles overexposure, as HP5 Plus is infamously known for being such a versatile film stock with regards to that. Well, if you've ever been curious to know the difference between HP5 Plus and Delta and undecided to know which film stock to pick, I hope this comparison video has helped. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.